Get me on the information superhighway! Honey. I want onto the information superhighway!
We'll be right back. Careful with that. There's no return. We'll have to shoot.
In the history of video game adaptations, there's never been quite as eclectic and interesting a history as what the Mega Man franchise has gotten up to. Capcom has been pretty inconsistent with what it gives its focus to in the form of cross-media support to its franchises, with Street Fighter ultimately being given most of their attention over time. And yet, if you were to look over everything, despite the franchise never being their greatest individual seller, well, it's rare that a gamer doesn't know of the Blue Bomber. And for good and for bad, the original Mega Man cartoon made in the 90s was rather successful in its own right despite how dated it is now. Thus it makes sense that in the media merchandise blitz that followed the success of the Battle Network games, that the first alternative universe sect to the Mega Man franchise would receive its own animated adaptation as well. Rockman.exe's anime adaptation, for its time, actually proved itself to be quite a successful series. Not only boosting the popularity of the brand at a time that Capcom was starting to struggle as a company despite its game output, but becoming something of an important landmark in securing positive memories of the .exe timeline. And while the series ultimately fell into backburner obscurity in the West, it happened through no fault of its own, as it was due to outside factors that it never saw full import to the Western market. I have been teasing a discussion about this anime for some time, as its divergences amusingly both complement and contrast the execution of characterization and stories in the main games, and that of the manga as well. Again, why I haven't before was I wanted to get farther along in the game reviews before I started, as the anime both outpaced the games in some regards while following in the footsteps of others. The anime was produced by the studio Sebek, which has been on my radar for a long time. Founded in 1995 and recently in 2019 sold to Sunrise and rebranded as Sunrise Beyond Studios, Sebek has been behind the production of a number of varied anime that, well, is a bit recurrently distinctive for a consistent art style across any of their productions. Though many of their productions ended up being more slice-of-life series with some fantasy or sci-fi element thrown into them. Series of note from their library include Martian successor Nadesico, the first two Zoids anime, Chaotic Century and New Century Zero, also known as the Good Zoids anime. I could have sworn I had some mollicutes of those at one point. Shaman King, the Space Battleship Yamato reboots, Nyaruko, Crawling with Love, Full Metal Panic Season 4 Invisible Victory, and a few more pervy fanservice-oriented series I'm not even going to vocally say, with the group also doing support animation on several assorted projects for other studios, including most of Pokemon's movies, as when they help produce something, their most common co-producer ends up being the Pokemon anime's production company Oriental Light and Magic. And while it might not seem like it, they had something out and on screen every year for their entire 24 years running. Their sale to Sunrise, though, happened as, well, the last few years? Yeah, diminishing returns in their productions. While I don't know the full story, I would honestly like to blame the Future Card Buddy Fight anime they ended up producing, as, to my understanding, that game isn't that popular, so the cross-media promotion did neither any good. Though there are points against their favor. When the company's been in charge of doing anime adaptations of manga, in particular the works of Ken Akamatsu like Love Hina and Negima, well, they tend to catch up to the manga, and then go completely off the rails into just crazy, or concluding with a non-committal non-ending that can end up frustrating fans. And I speak from experience with that. Stupid ending to the Shaman King anime. What, I can hold a grudge against a company I like, leading off into the adaptations of said series to jump ship to other studios if anything more is done. Personally, I believe that has more to do with the utilization of their personnel. The company only had 100 employees to their name, and the period in which these adaptations were made, where doing adaptations in just small annual seasons that went on hiatus in between production terms just wasn't done. Then a number of their series just have odd animation errors. Granted, 100 employees marks them as a small animation production company, but they tend to have more errors than, say, Kyoto Animation, who were of a similar size, would have. Still fewer than any toy-produced anime, though. And as is another common critique, a lot of their anime had the common issue of them looking, well, cheap, and the character designs being very samey and simplistic. Granted, they're not the only anime production company to bear many series with similar art styles and character design. I could spend a long time discussing why I like the angled stylization of Sunrise anime so much, but the critique had more bearing with how much of their setting and art style tended to be flat and uniform with their use of colors, with intricate detailing held back or rarely used to just pump out series on as small a budget as they could manage, while saving it in reserve for just smaller standout moments that didn't always seem worth it by the end. As such became more common over time in the anime industry, however, their preference for cheap and simple even more tended to make them blend into the background. But hey, even with these issues, I still have a soft spot for them, as while the animation quality wasn't always there, I tended to like the stories that got told and the characters involved. Up to a point. And the reason I don't have more of their series is a lot of them have not been collected or re-released. And ultimately, Xebec is one of those studios that people think fondly of when they remember what they've made, but they've never ultimately been outstanding, and even those who have fondness for them ultimately have issues with them. Again, an example, Shaman King's ending. So with the selling point of their anime more framing themselves about just trying to make good stories to make up for not always having the best animation, does the Rockman anime have a good writing team? Well, yes and no. Some of the people on the show already were or would come to be known for crap, while others are still staples of infamy and quality in the industry who make runaway hits even today. Who contribute to the series overall, and I will mention them again as time goes on, consists of, from the beginning, Keiichi Hasegawa, Kenichi Yamada, Masaharu Amiya, Mayuri Sekijima, Naoko Marukawa, Naruhisa Arakawa, and Tako Kato, with Access onwards adding to the staff Masashi Kubota and Katsuhiko Chiba, with Chiba ending up the second largest single contributor on this show after he joined the staff. Well, I've talked about Arakawa and Hasegawa's works before, case in point, the Super Sentai and Tokusatsu collectibles. Katsuhiko Chiba, I was actually surprised to learn had such an influence on it in specific, considering Outlaw Star is basically, well, my favorite anime, along with him, Masaharu Amiya, and Mayuri Sekijima being the main staff to my gateway anime, Tekkaman Blade. It's why I like discussing writers and what anime series they've influenced, cause the stuff that tends to really appeal to me all tend to have common names and influences attached, while stuff I hate always comes from the same sources, and for the same reasons nearly every goddamn time. And they were all ultimately overseen by head writer and series composer, Kenichi Araki. I've actually talked of and discussed the works of Kenichi Araki in the past, and no, he's not the JoJo's guy, he's a tokusatsu writer. Or, well, was one. He was one of the staff that helped create the classic masterpiece that was Kamen Rider Black, as well as writing a fair amount of the Sentai series Chojin Sentai Jetman, alongside Toshiki Inoue and Naruhisa Arakawa as the third most contributing writer to it, including being behind a number of Jetman's fun episodes.
Attack of the Killer Tomatoes! Attack of the Killer Tomatoes! They'll beat you, bash you, squish you, mash you, chew you up for brunch, and finish you off for dinner or lunch.
Ed also drew acclaim from working on the more heavily police-focused entries of the Metal Hero series. But eventually, he stopped working for Toei on those shows, or any others of theirs wholesale after the production of the Sentai series Zyuranger, aka the first Sentai adapted into a Power Rangers show. Why'd he stop? Well... yeah, he is yet another in a long line of bankable creative personnel that infamous jackass producer Shinichiro Shirakura pissed off into leaving the company for good, and has since avoided any project that shows up on any network Toei partners with as well. Seriously, there's a long list of actors, writers, and directors who boycott Toei just because of the misconduct of this one guy. It's baffling he's never been fired for creating such a hostile work environment that it's literally ruined or made terrible every show, film, or event or connected career he's ever actively had a hand in managing or interfered with. After he left Toei, though, his career gets, well, harder to track, bouncing between production companies to slip in and out of projects wherever he could get the work. Sometimes he's at Tsuburaya contributing to the Ultra series, as he did on Ultraman Nexus and Ultra Galaxy Mega Monster Battle. Sometimes he's over at Sunrise working on the Brave franchise with the series Goldran and Dagwan. the latter of which he was the head writer for and helped make it historically among the most successful of those series. Sometimes he's over at ShowPro or Studio Dean working on Kaijudo Duel Masters or Star Ocean EX, or being one of the single largest writing contributors to the success of the Zoids anime. But whatever it is, it's never been for a show that runs on any Toei-affiliated network, but only ones that run on the station TV Tokyo. Yes, whatever happened on Zyuranger's been that influential, despite many of the series he's worked on actually having him ending up partnering with Keiichi Hasegawa, who he seems to get along with really, really well. It's astounding the number of projects those two have had in common over the years. But over time, he came to be known as one of the most commonly known significantly contributing writers to productions from Studio Xebec. And ultimately, he is the man most responsible for the writing and story direction of the Rockman.exe anime. As a good head writer is wont to do when they're not just defining the entire story themselves, he would drive in the major bullet points of the story in his episodes, and then leave the other writers to flesh out the interim between them and help connect the dots together. Most bad episodes? Ultimately not his fault, but others on staff. And trust me, there are some really bafflingly bad episodes in here, especially early on. But of his career, Rockman.exe's anime is Kenichi Araki's largest continuous contribution to Japanese media. And it's in a way kind of sad that a lot of the productions he wrote on, well, ended up falling into obscurity, even though many of them remain beloved by their original audiences and as fan favorites. It's an odd dichotomy that such is rarely recognized with him, for him to then be part of what might be considered as a more mainstream hit, as several of Hasegawa's works have become. But as a result, I don't exactly have a great grasp on his quirks as a writer, as his credits are rarely full series contributions for you to then see his full influence to judge him by. At best, I can tell you that he prefers to write and create characters that are snarky, genre-savvy, and ultimately become culminations of learned experiences of what they're put through. A combination that I find more and more to be ridiculously rare to exist in Japanese series, where the default has somehow become either self-insert Gary Stews, or brain-dead idiots that win because the plot says so, with said rare exceptions becoming, well, breakout characters, with then people just not getting why they're breakout characters. Seriously, why is it so hard to justify your character becoming a badass? As for the quality of the seasons produced, well, it's a pretty easy thing to see. While I've previously hailed the series as having really good storytelling, well, it's because the most memorable elements of the series come later on into it in the Access and Stream seasons, and don't exactly exist from the start. As a result, the first season of them is easily the worst due to those lesser elements they lose later. It starts badly doing a lot of ridiculously stupid tongue-in-cheek comedy plots which both undermine the more serious terrorism stories and make most of the cast seem like imbeciles. While many series which eventually become successes can start poorly, it's normally better to excise this crap as fast as you can before it hurts you in the long run. The most enjoyment I get out of these early episodes personally is the cast snarking at the craziness they get sucked into for quite a bit of it, though it is a positive hike uphill over time. The dub tries to downplay the dumbness of these episodes, thus leading to some people hating the dub due to its inaccuracies, and I can kind of get that anger when it interferes with characterization of the cast as localization that changes the story should not happen. But one of the things the first season really fails to do is the proper establishment of the setting and what is capable in it. Thus the anything goes nature of it just makes it a pain to watch, as when you don't do that, you default to, it's the same as the modern day aside from this one thing, instead of everything being different and they just didn't even bother to share. By the midpoint of the season though, and after the first major arc closes, that mostly ends. And the quality picks up from there, but you're still stuck with a lot of borderline unwatchable episodes only really saved by Netto, Mail, and their navvies being exasperated at the insanity around them. But even in the back half of the season, there's just a lot of silly off-the-wall stuff thrown at us. It just tries to not be as ridiculous as it was beforehand. I'm not entirely sure who's responsible for this, if it was following from existing trends of kid-oriented anime, as oh my, there's retread tropes of all of those early on, and many of the writing staff did work on such shows for it to then blend itself in, or if it was the mandate from the producers of this given series that wanted to start off with cheap pandering, but it did not do the first season any favors. As such, while there are a few notable moments in the first one and the establishment of a number of concepts for the setting eventually, a lot of it is a slog to get through. And not helped with how it takes forever to get any decent battles between the net navies, where early on it's just a minute at most per episode where you see them engaging each other, with a lot of them curb stomps at that. This series also places overwhelming focus on the human characters, but does little with them much of the time, shoving most interaction with navies completely out of the picture. While that's always been a comparative problem with some of the events of the Battle Network games, some more than others where the navies aren't even given a chance at personality, it's felt more deeply in the first season of the series. Axis, however, as I've mentioned before, is where the anime really started to succeed and learned what it wanted to be, ultimately becoming a soft reboot of the series and losing almost everything that had held the first season back, with the introduction of cross-fusion, allowing Neto and Rockman to fight in special designated areas of the real world to take on larger, more dangerous threats in one long, continuous season-spanning story arc, broken up into smaller arcs and focused recurring antagonists, which built itself naturally. While much of this was derived from concepts of antagonists from the games, Axis actually did more with what they were handed than the games did, and not just because of the extended runtime of the anime over the length of the games, but simply giving everything a more tangible motivation, design, and ultimate end goal to their scheming than what the source game, Battle Network 4, bothered to provide. This series reduces the number of human antagonists while increasing the recurring interactions with the navies of the series, an ironic thing to occur considering it's unfairly criticized as a series that made Rockman himself irrelevant when Neto could just change into a navi himself. But instead, I see it as examining the contrasting bond between people and AI via the changing dynamics caused by cross-fusion, and the expressions of self that also result thanks to the invocation and introduction of Battle Network 4 and 5's sole unison mechanic into the series. And what helped to make Axis a lot more memorable and leave an impression on you over the first series is simply the contrast it played. The first series placed more emphasis on childish things and situations the bad guys would intrude on, the cast of course just kids in a time where stuff like cybercrime was normal. But as Axis hit, it became transitionary as adult issues and concerns took focus at the center of the crisis. And while the age of the characters was never forgotten in their role in things, the importance of them to become involved could not be denied, thus causing the cast to have to grow up and deal with more mature things in their lives and how they handle situations. Not abandoning their childhood and childish things, but becoming more aware of the world around them and their responsibilities in it and part of it. Stream in turn immediately follows from Axis, continuing the arc begun there at a new angle, so instead of seeming like a soft reboot of the series, it naturally feels like the next piece in the story, only with the stakes further raised by a long trial from a mysterious force that defies the explanation and power of the heroes. Like Megaman Battle Network 5, from which it draws parallel story basis, it's as much an exploration of humanity through an allegorical lens, with Neto and company coming to recruit more allies to help fight for the fate of humanity. Quality and reception-wise, Stream is considered the best of the seasons, with the only common competition being with Axis for that title, and Axis' defenders for the best title usually being in the Western fandom camp in my experience. That is for two paired reasons, in that Axis was the last season of the series to be dubbed and broadcast in the Americas, and Stream as mentioned being left in a half-translated state for well over a decade. So many people didn't even seek out fansubs to see where the story next went due to those delays. Ultimately though, there's no real reason to fight over which is the better half, as ultimately Axis and Stream all come together as the best sect of the series when viewed as a 100-episode arc, plus a movie. The Program of Light and Darkness, the series' tie-in movie, takes place during Stream as well, with it double-billed with Duel Master's movie Curse of the Death Phoenix. While it mainly exists to promote Forte Cross and utilize more of Battle Network 5's story that couldn't easily be slotted into Stream's active arc, the film actually helped to set a Japanese box office record for opening week sales for the season it opened in, at least until the Keanu Reeves movie Constantine broke it the following year. Beast and Beast Plus, the final seasons, had it the roughest. Stream unfortunately tapped out a lot of storytelling potential that was left with nowhere to continue the story next, and the plot points made available by Battle Network 6's content unfortunately could not be easily used due to a lack of foresight in planning out a long game, as several of the cast members needed to make that plot work had gone through developments where them inciting such a plot would not work, or were otherwise unavailable due to prior story events. Thus, when in doubt, alternative universe plot where we can both explore more interactions between characters in a new setting and look at old dynamics in a new light. While it took forever to get translated, I actually watched Beast Raw as such episodes became available, And unfortunately, Beast has the rightful opinion of being polarizing for what it does in trying to break the monotony of the status quo. But it's gonna be a toss-up on a personal level on whether you'll like this season, as it ends up literally becoming an isekai plot. And with the overwhelming number of isekai anime and games out these days that have to do with game logic and pseudo-cyberspace settings, you might just feel a bit too tapped out to care due to the market saturation of them. In honesty, it might simply been better to close things at the end of Beast, but there is some good to Beast Plus as well as the series' swan song. The writers knew things were moving towards conclusion in the series, thus while adapting elements of Battle Network 6 they had yet to get to, they also went about integrating elements of the peripheral Battle Network games as well, including content from Network Transmission and the Battle Network's phone mobile game. Unfortunately, all the episodes in the final season are half-length at 11 minutes an episode, an extreme oddity for a Japanese series who almost religiously keep content structure to fit into a half-hour time slot, with a double build and airing with another Zebek series, Ape Escape on Air, an adaptation of the video game of the same name. It's honestly depressing how they went about that, as the number of the episodes read as a standard 20-minute story that was split down the middle for runtime, or an A and a B plot in a standard episode that were given a dedicated one instead due to a slashed runtime. I don't think anyone would have really had an issue had the final season been just 13 episodes, as even though the translation isn't quite complete on this one, I liked what I saw. But it was easy to see why, by this point, that such was done. The Battle Network games had closed out their run, and the Star Force games were closing in the distance, and with it, their own immediately developed anime series Ryusei no Rockman, aka Shooting Star Rockman, also called Megaman Star Force, once more an import, which then got screwed over because it was still in the same time slot and stuck at 11 minutes an episode, with it likewise being double billed with the sequel series to Ape Escape. Incidentally, both Ape Escape series were written by Naruhisa Arakawa, a writer I've mentioned infrequently as one whose work I normally enjoy. As usually, he doesn't go monkeying about with his work. While Kenichi Araki stayed on to helm the series, Star Force just wasn't as well liked. Much like the Star Force games overall had reception issues, and that series ended up canned as well eventually. While it was able to gain one sequel season, it only adapted content through Star Force 2 into Shooting Star Rockman Tribe, the entire anime continuity of the Battle Network verse ending up concluding at the end of March 2008, which can still be considered a pretty decent run as it lasted over half a decade. Hell, even by the time the series hit its low ratings mark in the midst of Beast Plus, it was still hanging on with an average of 4.5% viewership in 2006, at a time when being a solidly successful series made you only need to average 5% viewership. For the viewership of a final season, one screwed over like Beast Plus was, that was not bad at all. Which thus allowed it to close with grace as one of the most successful and long-running continuous adaptations of a video game series ever released. And only beaten out, to my knowledge, to date, by the unstoppable juggernaut that is the Pokemon anime, and Yokai Watch in that. This all also somewhat informed the mistreatment of the series in its Western broadcast. Now, keep in mind, by the point the series aired here, it was 2003. The anime invasion, thanks to the likes of Toonami, Pokemon, and Digimon making people widely conscious of the media form, was long underway. While the programming block Fox Kids, their compatriot block on Fox Family, later ABC Family and Jetix, and Kids WB had all taken on anime for Saturday morning broadcasts back when those were still a thing, as well as some weekday broadcast blocks for some content that was still a thing. This series ended up falling through the cracks, but in ways entirely expected by those who understood that American networks, to this day, have no idea how to properly broadcast any series that has successive continuity and is aimed at a younger audience, due to American television syndication making them think they could just play any episode at any time, in any order, without care to an actual story arc. Megaman NT Warrior, and then later Megaman NT Warrior Access, as the series was rebranded in English, first saw broadcast in May of 2003, as part of Kids WB's cartoon programming block on what used to be the WB network, these days being the CW network, with production for the dub being overseen by Viz Media. While the series started over a full year after the series had started in Japan, this was fine. Usually back then, we were a year behind on any anime broadcasts if we were getting new stuff from abroad. It took time to dub stuff and get merchandise out if it had a tie-in for it. We could wait as we had patience, as it couldn't be done faster back then if you wanted a decent product. Unnecessary localization changes and dub music production notwithstanding. As God, some series became terrible after being hit by those. Hell, even in modern times with anime simuldubs, it sometimes takes a while to get physical releases. I adored 4S Gridman when it aired in late 2018, but the home video release took until the beginning of 2020 to get out. Compare that to any of the My Hero Academia home sets, which started being made available within 6 months of the broadcast of a given set's last episode. It's even worse when trying to get dub episodes of One Piece, considering Funimation's over 7 years behind in the dubbing of that, and refused to update the releases of those to concise Blu-ray sets. But yeah, Megaman started in May of 2003 as an off-season filler series, and thanks to some of the localization changes making some plots less dumb, it got a lot of people on board the series and into playing their related games, myself included. They were skipping things, such as episodes 6 through 8, but at the time it wasn't as big a deal to see that happen. You could see it as shortening runtimes to make sure everything important fit in the schedule, or possibly from problematic content that stopped them from airing due to either censorship issues or post-9/11 content restrictions. It had happened before. Case in point, Toonami refused to air some episodes of some anime it had the rights to, such as Outlaw Star's Beach episode due to full frontal nudity, and had that been the case, it would have been understandable why several episodes never saw release. But no, that was not what was going on. Whether due to poor planning or something else taking precedence, Kids WB ultimately only got the series as filler for a time slot with no real intentions of supporting it long term as they were with 4Kids' dubs of Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon. The broadcast of the anime only occurred for 14 consecutive weeks before it stopped in episode 17, they had skipped 3 of the interim episodes to get to that point, and did not continue its broadcast until 9 months later. It was not until May of 2004, a full year since the first episode had aired, that broadcast of the series resumed, and at that point they just started burning through episodes, concluding the first arc of the first season, which they still had 7 episodes to run through, in literally a week, when they could have done that at any time in the preceding months as they had multiple free time slots to put them in if they wanted, where otherwise there was just plain garbage running, or some dead series they just kept around for the hell of it. Hell, the episodes they ran, there was so little advertisement of them that the only time I caught them was when they were rerun the week after as a special Saturday afternoon marathon event on Cartoon Network, which often shared some programming with Kids WB since both were owned by Warner Brothers. Something Cartoon Network ended up doing a lot from 2003 through 2008. With a number of the series they had the right to air, but had carelessly been shoveled off of normal broadcast schedules for some stupid reason or another. Others I remember that happening to were the final episodes of Zoid's Guardians Force, Transformers Energon, Yu-Gi-Oh! 5D's Dark Signers arc for the majority of it since 4Kids refused to air it on their programming block due to the content in it, and actually, they did this with a lot of anime titles later on, as if they wanted to shove them off the network, but didn't want to anger fans that did maintain stable ratings for them by suddenly making them disappear right before their already prepared and dubbed conclusions. The jumbled era continued from there, once again skipping around episodes and content at random and shuffling them all over the place, making it literally impossible to follow any element of the plot from there. Episodes 26 and 27 were never broadcast and likewise never dubbed, along with episodes 43 and 52, despite the former two setting up a vacation arc that gave Megaman an entirely new set of powers to use in the back end of the series, with everything then skipping ahead to episode 30, with every few episodes from there having something missing or something screwed up in its order of run. Looking at it at the time, and if you're aware that the series had multiple seasons, you might think it had just been stuck in the backlog so long that they were cutting everything superfluous to just hit the major beats in order to move on to the next series, or that it was Viz Media's production of the dub that could have been the problem. It was not, at least as far as I can find. While there was a cast change mid-production, from Alex Doduk voicing Landy Kari to Brad Swale instead taking over at episode 18 when the series did come back in 2004, production for the dub was intentionally halted over that time. And they didn't rush to production of Megaman Access's dub either. Access's first episode was broadcast in November of 2004 as a special event promotion, before the grand majority of the episodes they skipped in the first season, which eventually did get dubbed, were then broadcast for the first time after it until the end of December of 2004. Again, at the time you might have thought it was a, buy us some time, we're going to get something good for you, olive branch over the mistreatment. Except then the same cycle repeated itself. Axis' dub didn't properly start broadcast until March of 2005. 5 months late, and months after toys promoting the show had both hit and started to be taken off of shelves. And this time on Kids WB's weekday block, where it barely had any attention given to it. And once again, plot-relevant episodes of it were often still played either out of order or only exclusively in Canada, if they were dubbed at all. Kids WB as a programming block was in horrifically bad shape by 2005, in part because of its horrendous management in later years, to the point that Cartoon Network had entirely absorbed into itself most of the dub anime series it had, with the Hoenn region Pokemon seasons onwards as a staple to its programming, despite Pokemon's broadcast beginning on Kids WB, at least until Disney XD took up the Pokemon rights, while Yu-Gi-Oh! GX had its own permanent residence over on CN's weekday block, Maguzi. Once more, the prior series was originally part of Kids WB's run. And in general, cable stations aimed towards younger demographics taking on their own weekday specialized programming blocks appeared to make main networks doing the same redundant and unnecessary. The support was slowly pulled from them over time. Once again, Megaman's broadcast in the West was seen as just something to mindlessly fill time. With the network in better shape, it's likely they wouldn't have even bothered, or put even less effort into putting it out there than they did. Because by the time Axis finally included in the West, despite them airing 5 times a week to literally rush through the series, and still ultimately cutting 5 episodes from its airing, including Lan and Mail's first date, despite there being nothing wrong with any of that content, not only had Rockman Stream ended in Japan, Rockman Beast was halfway through its run as well. And Battle Network 5 had released half a year prior and was old news, making the related anime meant to tie in and promote it pointless to import. Even if someone desperately wanted to see it, well, all support for it had long dried up due to the mangled broadcast just not making it worth it for many. As for access to be engaging, you needed the establishment details of the first series. And you couldn't even get those from Viz's DVD releases of the show. Due to all of Kids WB's delays, the first volume of the 13 original series DVDs didn't get out until August of 2004, months after they'd finally broadcast the remains of Season 1. With the final 13th DVD completing just the first anime, not getting out until March of 2007, over a full year after Axis's broadcast had concluded. And Axis's dub has never, in any way, shape, or form, seen any type of home release, because the DVDs, due to their delays and the other issues of the dub, just did not sell. As has been previously discussed both by myself and other YouTubers, anime import companies used to have horrible import policies with regards to releasing the series they had the rights to, most of the time just repackaging how things were done in Japan to 4 or 5 episodes per release at $30 a pop, with the occasional full set release retailing for $100 or $200 per set, unless they were discount collections. Collecting anime in the 2000s was ridiculously expensive, so not a lot of people were willing to or able to shell out for copies of a series that they might have liked but saw completely out of order due to horrible broadcast scheduling. It was really only things that got on air and were super rampantly popular that were guaranteed sales, with everything else that got out just becoming a shot-in-the-dark sleeper hit at best back then. And a grand majority of the time, the only things that got those super strong kinds of sales were Funimation, Bandai, and some major third-party titles that were broadcast on Toonami. Even sales of 4Kids' dub anime just did not compare, though that was not helped by 4Kids committing fraud over their failures to properly media distribute anything they licensed. But a key to a lot of them taking off was the home video releases' proximity to their airing. Funimation kept them close. Bandai usually had a DVD ready to go with Toonami's broadcast of a series. Even 4Kids with the original Yu-Gi-Oh! DVDs usually had them out a few months after the broadcast of their dub. And a DVD of a dub years behind its broadcast, after the series had left Presence of Mind, in the 2000s where you'd have to very slowly collect the sets, Yeah, it stood no chance in hell of recouping any form of interest for a continuing home video release of the remaining content, as Viz Media has done more recently with what anime they still import and dub. In a lot of ways, what we have now with the 13 to 26 episode anime sets, or larger collections if you were buying from Discotek, is far better, as once you factor in inflation to the cost of these sets, they're practically a bargain. Now if only Aniplex would figure that out, cause I am not paying $760 to own the entire series of Da Rah Rah, which only lasts for 65 episodes. Seriously, if you've ever seen the price for Aniplex anime, it's all highway robbery and how they're priced. It explains a lot why their series get pirated a lot. But even worse for the Megaman DVDs was the episodes were not in chronological or narrative order, nor did they include any of the episodes that were not broadcast or dubbed, and they were all restructured to be in the American broadcast order, which, as said, was all over the place and made the longer story arc incomprehensible. Volumes 11, 12, and 13, yeah, they're all made up of the episodes the dub originally skipped, but later released as filler content before they started on Access. The Volume 12 collection I'm holding up contains ones that were actually listed as being in the 20s and early 30s in episode order. This is like incompetence on literally open display. Hell, the only reason I have so many of the DVDs is I kept finding them in bargain bins or used media stores for super cheap. So with how NT Warrior was treated, yeah, I'm not ever expecting anyone to pick up the license for any of the Battle Network's anime series to collect them in proper sets. Nor to see any distribution of the Star Force series, which, yeah, some of those were dubbed as well for some reason, and I just don't get why, considering I just saw it as a one-time only broadcast on Toonami at that, in a movie format. Regardless, the first and second seasons are still both missing episodes from their dub. It would be next to impossible for a role reprisal for the dub cast to take place, and this series did not see enough spotlight or attention to potentially get redubbed. So for many, there's just no point. Capcom has had much better luck with the redistribution of the games, and Ryotaka Misaki's manga series still gets around. And while I feel the anime is not something that should just be forgotten, well, the reality is what it is. This series is just one that will only really survive through fan subs, as there's legitimately no other way it will likely see proper distribution. Though that in turn has its own fair share of issues. Some of these series have only been subbed using their TV RIP incarnations, with such done primarily in the 2000s, with work to subtitle Stream and Beast Plus lasting through the 2010s. Meaning for people who are fans of the .exe anime when it aired in the West and want to see everything with subs, well, there's going to be some complications. As I've discussed before, modern subbing is done differently than it was in the late 90s and 2000s. These days you can get broadcast transcripts ripped from airing of episodes to use in their translation, or otherwise in quality control to make sure you're either getting what you are saying right, or, if you need to take some liberties for everything to read properly, to make sure you're carrying the proposed intent of what is being said without lying to your audience due to the unnecessary substitution. This, however, was not the case and rarely possible in the 90s and 2000s for fan subs, with only dubbing companies getting those scripts to work off with any regularity. This resultantly is the problem with a fair chunk of the early translation for the Rockman.exe series. No one has taken the time to clean up the earlier work on it. Which, hey, it happens. I've frequently made use of subs that aren't always perfect if there's nothing better available. It's not a big deal to me as the groups I use, unless it's an unofficial release that screwed over the better fan subs for no reason and just showed terrible quality control, once again looking at Shout Factory at that, tend to be the ones which retain the most information properly, even if there are some errors to the work. Here, though, it's the first run works or nothing, and even they are hard to come across now. Thus, if anyone has complaints of, I missed this or that, well, there you go. And I know I'm still missing a lot here. Due to this being niche of niche, I can barely find info on what happened with all this due to so many links being dead. Most of what I have presented is reconstruction from public info that was attached to other works, or Japanese sources I ran through a translator. The most I've actually gotten that was specifically in association to this series is from the Anime News Network's archives, primarily because some idiot on the Megaman Wiki's admin staff butchered the .exe verse entries of it, which removed a crap ton of information in all the credited source links that used to be there before they overhauled the pages to split them by continuity instead of one concise page each character or term had before, which had the continuity differences all listed in their own distinct sections so people wouldn't confuse them, thus no separate pages wherever actually needed. They removed all this crap. The old ones kept everything concise, but now the collected information that was there before is just gone. Who on an admin team intentionally deletes sourced information that your wiki is meant to archive? I should also note that yes, since I am reviewing the Japanese version of everything and not the dub of the first 2 seasons in this incarnation, I am going to be referring to everyone using their Japanese names. As said, I don't have much of an issue with the name changes for the Battle Network game's American release, as they are for the most part managing to transliterate the names so they don't really screw it up. And really, the biggest one I've had was for how they've altered Chauds depending on version you're playing, cause, yeah, I've screwed that up before unintentionally. My bad once again. But this is simply to keep everything simple with regards to the version I am using for review. It would be strange and hard to follow if I referred to Higsby as Higsby at the same time the cast is talking about the actions of a guy named Higure, and that's a level of confusion I think we'd all like to avoid. It is not for the same reasons where I did that with the Yu-Gi-Oh! Reviews, where I was protesting against 4Kids' awful dubbing and localization policies in their entirety by refusing to utilize the dub changes there. As again, the name changes of the Battle Network series mostly made sense and did their best to keep the intended reference and double meaning to the names intact in doing so. I respect those changes, but we're just going to be working off of keep it simple stupid for things here, so as to not confuse viewers. It will still be confusing for those who have had only seen these characters in the games, manga, or dub, but I'm trying to simplify things for you all, so we'll work with what we've got. As for who was responsible for them, well, it's actually a number of groups. Season 1's translation was provided by Anime Haven for episodes 1 through 15 of the series, and following that, it became a dual production between Anime Haven and the group Wolfpack Productions. Access would then be taken over near entirely by Wolfpack Productions, with the first 2 initially subbed with the assistance of TV Nihon, back when that group also subtitled anime and not just tokusatsu. Stream as well was initially done by Wolfpack Productions, until the group just up and disappeared, most of the original sub-team going with it. The movie that aired during stream and ties into its story, the program of Light and Darkness, still has their subs of it the most popularly distributed version. The series was then ultimately picked up / cleaned up by a combination of DAT subs, High C, and Irregular Hunter Productions, who are the ones who have had the most active copies of their work floating around. Beast's fan sub, though, can once more be credited to Wolfpack Productions. Why they worked on Beast's sub before completing stream is anyone's guess, as in the 2000s, yeah, it could sometimes be hard to get raws of some anime. I'm betting that's why they never completed their sub of stream at any rate. While Beast Plus once more has the work for them having been done by Regular Hunter Productions. As of the writing and recording of this video, they've completed through episode 16 and usually average 1 episode a month or so. So Beast Plus is looking to be done by mid to late 2020, 14 years after the series actually concluded. And people complain about a fan sub being delayed a week because the translators want to make sure their work has few errors as possible. There's just no pleasing some people. But this informs how I'm going to be approaching this series differently than how I've done reviews before. I'm going to be doing this episode by episode in shorter reviews. As of the release of this video, I've already produced videos recapping the first arc of the series, and we'll see how that goes from there. Ergo, the need for this uber-massive backstory to the series production and its reception video. One longer than any other I've done. This is for a few reasons. First off, if you've been following my channel and production career for a long time, have you seen how hard it's been for me to get out videos the last few years? Yeah, I'm barely able to between work and growing physical inability. Shorter, simpler vids that can quickly be gotten out are needed simply for buffer content between the bigger stuff. Second, content ID on YouTube is getting worse and worse, to the point that, yeah, if the videos for the first arc of the series start getting hit and taken down wholesale, I'm scrapping this project and just focusing on the video games and releasing vids as I can get them done without a set schedule. And third, frankly, I'm running short on things I can do videos on that I'd be able to get out in a reasonable amount of time. RPG reviews are not a simple thing to get done in a time crunch, as there's only so much time that can be committed before health issues become a problem. I'm hoping I'll actually be able to get through this entire series, but it is going to take time. But hey, Megaman / Rockman fans ultimately seem to be a pretty patient bunch, so with any luck, that won't be a problem. So let's wrap this up and start up the recaps of the series with something else that's a traditional staple part of my reviews, and briefly discuss the series' opening themes. Season 1's, to match the other issues with it, is the worst of them. Pierce Through the Wind by Jin Hashimoto is so freaking slow about getting to the freaking point. It can kind of be seen as a microcosm of the first season's pacing problems, as most of it spent its time doing nothing. Seriously, it takes until most of the opening is done with to present anything telling about the series, characters, or what the hell it's supposed to be about. I hate to say it, but as bad as the American dub opening was, it got straight to the frickin' point. In a way, this one can be seen as, in all the wrong ways, as mimicking the lack of content there was with the first Battle Network game, versus everything that came after it. Axis' theme by comparison, Futatsu no Mirai, aka Twin Futures, by Michihiro Kuroda is a vast improvement, mimicking how Axis itself was for all intents and purposes the Series 2.0, and actually managed to fit thematically with the show's dual focus on a real and digital existence between the two protagonists, and the twin worlds crossing and clashing. Stream's theme, Be Somewhere by Busy, which I have featured before in my Battle Network reviews, is the best of the themes without exception. Catchy, fast-paced, fits well with its imagery and emphasizing the overall danger of the big bads and their tests upon humanity, and the whole Crisis Stream story revolves around stopping. Beast's theme, Shori no Uta, aka Song of Victory, by Dandelion, in turn is the second best of the themes, and comes off as the series kind of taking a victory lap by managing to last into its fourth year successfully, which, as I said, surpassed pretty much every adaptation of a video game franchise made, short of Pokemon back in its day. And also something expected to be sung by any of the varying factions as they tried in their own ways to grasp the keys to their own conquests. And Beast Plus has no opening theme, just a quick jingle due to the series' episode lengths being cut in half, which ultimately was a disappointment. With all said, this wraps up this ridiculously long introduction video, and I'll see you all next time for the beginning of our episodic look at the series, none of which will be anywhere near as long as this.